Okay. So any questions before we get started? And if you don't mind to go ahead and put in the chat your name and the county that you're from. Okay, so for our first activity before we start, so we're going to be talking about diet trends. I want you all to either in the chat or you can just say out loud. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds and we're going to think of as many diets as you can. So as many diet names as you can think of. So go ahead and do that. And if you're in groups, you can talk amongst yourselves. We have vegetarian, keto, Mediterranean, paleo, intermittent fasting, Whole30, Nutrisystem, Weight Watchers, Slim Fast. The grapefruit diet, fasting Atkins diet. Any others? We've got some intermittent fasting, another Atkins. Okay, if you think of any others, continue to chat or type them in the chat box. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this is a pretty lengthy presentation. I'm going to try and be as in-depth as I can, but while also not taking up an enormous amount of time. But if you all have questions, I'm going to be talking a lot, which I don't like to do, but this is just a lot of information. If you all have questions or comments, just feel free to unmute yourselves and ask. This is informal, so don't be scared to interrupt. But we'll go ahead and get started. So the objectives for today.
Wait, before we start, are we going to have a handout that goes with this, or do we need to jot down notes as we go?
I sent all of the materials to your agents. And so you'll get a handout, an evaluation, and a copy of this PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, okay. So we can just pick it up at the
Yes, and if you want me to just email it to you, you can type your email in the chat and I'll just email everyone the information afterward. So any other questions? Okay, so the objectives for today, we're going to talk about how your body uses food. We're going to go over several common diet trends. So maybe those that are more prevalent right now, or maybe those that are trending. And those are going to be intermittent fasting, Whole30, paleo, and the ketogenic diet. And then we're going to talk about how you can identify red flags in a lot of these diet trends. So are they too good to be true? Like, what are some red flags they're going to tell you maybe they're not for you? And then we're just going to talk about general healthy eating and lifestyle that you can incorporate. So first, we're going to go through kind of the science behind how our body utilizes food. So there's a lot of factors that go into your body weight. And many of those are going to be your age, your gender, your body composition, your metabolism, which we'll talk about. But a lot of people have a hard time maintaining a healthy body weight. And so we're going to go over some of those factors. We're going to talk about why that is. But anyone that has done a lot of yo-yo dieting or weight cycling, can actually be pretty harmful on your body and put you at a higher potential of developing health risks later on in life. So yo-yo dieting, your weight going up and down, fluctuating a whole lot, is not good in the long run. And so there is a big misconception that your metabolism, having a slow metabolism, causes excess weight gain. But that's actually not true. So I'm sorry, let me mute my phone really quickly. Okay. So actually the biggest effect on your metabolism is going to be your physical activity and how much you eat and drink. Usually it's not going to be from anything else. So your metabolism is actually a process from which your body breaks down food and uses it for energy. And so there's several factors, again, that will influence your metabolism. So your body composition is one of them. So people who are larger or have more muscle will burn more calories at rest. So also your gender is another one. Men usually have less body fat and more muscle, and women of the same age will have more fat and less muscle. So naturally the men will burn more calories at resting. Another factor is your age. So as you get older, your muscle tends to deteriorate because you're using it less. And so you tend to gain more fat, and that will make you burn less calories. How you process your food. So that's a process called thermogenesis, how your body breaks down your food, has an effect on your metabolism. And then also your physical activity. So how much you exercise, how active you are, is going to play a role in that as well. So what happens to food when I eat? So food is fuel for your body. You need it to perform any kind of activities or even just to function. So like just sitting there, breathing, digesting, keeping your heart going, all of that takes energy. So your body uses that and breaks it down in a form called metabolism. And during that, your metabolism, food and oxygen are changed into energy and carbon dioxide, and it's used for all of your activities throughout the day and night. So just a few of the hormones that are going to impact your appetite. I'm not going to get into detail too much on these, but a few of them you might have heard of, some of them maybe not. So ghrelin is an appetite stimulant hormone, and that is what signals your brain when you're hungry. While on the opposite end, leptin is the hormone that suppresses your appetite. And so that is going to signal your brain when you're full. And so people that tend to overeat a lot become resistant to leptin over time. So that is how they're able to continuously overeat. And then insulin is a storage hormone. When you have high levels of insulin, your body is telling you to store the food that you're consuming. Whereas if you have low levels, your body is going to break them down and store them as fat and energy. And then when you're insulin resistant, so if you have type 2 diabetes, your body is less likely or does not respond to those signals very effectively. And so together, all of these help us in telling us how much to eat, what and when to eat, when to stop. And then for our body's energy source, which we'll get kind of into this when we get into some of those fad diets. So a lot of you have probably heard of glucose, especially if you're diabetic. So glucose is our primary fuel source. And glucose comes from carbohydrates and starchy foods. And when you eat those things, your body breaks it down into glucose, and then it utilizes it for energy. Glycolysis is when your body breaks down that glucose from your food, and it's able to extract the energy and send it to the places that it needs to go. Gluconeogenesis is when your body is producing new glucose. So this usually occurs during prolonged times of fasting. So if you are not eating, you're not getting your glucose from your food, your body's going to find other sources to find that glucose for your energy. Okay, any questions so far? I think that's about as sciencey as we're going to get for today. Now we're just going to move on to the different types of diets. So the first one that we're going to talk about is paleo, and I don't think anybody named paleo in our chat earlier. So how many of you all are familiar with the paleo diet? And has anyone tried it? No? Okay. So the paleo diet, you might have heard it also called the caveman diet or the Stone Age diet. And the idea behind the paleo diet is we're going back to like our historic eating patterns, back to the caveman stages, which is why it's called that. So typically, back in those times, we were hunter-gatherers. So a lot of our food sources came from meat, a lot of protein, and obviously no processed foods. So the paleo diet cuts out all of those. It focuses more on just whole fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, shellfish and fish, sometimes eggs, and then maybe some oils and fruits. So it's cutting out any type of processed foods. The idea is eating foods that you might have found in nature. Now, the only con of this, or not the only con, but one big con of this diet is obviously when you're eating a lot of meat, depending on the type of meat you're eating, could have some negative side effects in the long term, causing you to be more at risk for chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. So like I said, the paleo diet is including fresh proteins like any types of meats, fish, shellfish, eggs, nuts and seeds, fresh fruits and vegetables, some oils, and small amounts of honey. And it is eliminating any type of grains, whether they be whole or refined grains, dairy, legumes, alcohol, coffee, and then anything like salt, sugar, any refined vegetable oils, any processed foods. So this is kind of what the paleo plate would look like in comparison to my plate. And so you'll notice the difference here is there's no dairy and there's also no grain. So it just kind of divides everything else up evenly with the plate. So you're only really eating proteins, fruits, and vegetables. So some pros of this diet, obviously it encourages you to eat fruits and vegetables because that's going to be a third of your plate. Getting nuts and seeds, all your healthy fats from those, and lean proteins. However, which I'll say this in a lot of these diets, there's just not a lot of research, especially for the long term, on how efficient these diets are and what the health benefits are for longer than 6 months. Some cons, so you can see there's a lot more cons on this diet than pros. So the cons are, it doesn't emphasize portion sizes at all. There's a heavy reliance on meat. It overemphasizes fresh foods. So for a lot of people, that's just not convenient or not realistic and can often be more expensive too. It also excludes 2 entire food groups. So it totally eliminates dairy and grains. And it's also just a very restrictive diet, which for a lot of people can lead to difficulties for long-term commitment, just not a very realistic, sustainable diet for long-term for many people. And then also there's just a lack of evidence for how safe and effective this diet is in the long term. And so anytime you're wanting to try a diet, it's important that you do a little bit of research and see, like, you can read a lot of studies done and testing done on this diet as far as what are the benefits and what are going to be the long-term maybe difficulties. So with the research there is, which is very little, there's only short-term trials, less than 6 months. There was shown some greater weight loss, reduced waist circumference, decreased blood pressure, and improved cholesterol. So short-term it can be effective for a lot of people, but like I said, we don't know what the long-term effects would be for this. Our next diet is the ketogenic diet, which we did have some people name that one in the chat. I feel like this one probably is one of the most relevant ones. I hear people talk about this one a lot. So has anybody maybe tried the ketogenic? Maybe they've got family members that have tried it. Anybody done some research into it? Okay, so the ketogenic diet, otherwise known as the keto diet. So there's several versions of this. There's several different ways to do it, which you'll probably find talking to different people. But the basic premise of this diet is eating very low carbohydrate. So depending on the person, could vary from 50 to 150 grams per day, which is very, very little. And then this is also a high fat intake diet. So even though this is really relevant today and a lot of people are trying this right now, it's been around for a long time. It was introduced in the 1920s as a way to treat children with epilepsy. So the whole point of the ketogenic diet is to get your body to a state of ketosis. And that is basically teaching your body to break down fat and use that as energy. So we talked about how glucose is your primary source of energy. Glucose comes from carbohydrates. But if you're on the ketogenic diet, you're not getting a lot of carbohydrates, so you're not getting a lot of glucose. So your body is having to figure out other ways to find the energy that it needs. And in this diet, the goal is to teach your body how to use fat for energy. So fat stores are broken down to produce energy instead of glucose, and that produces ketones. And so those come from your liver and also your muscles and other tissue for energy. So is this dangerous? It is a very, it's a hard diet to do correctly because it's very hard to eat low carbohydrate, especially for a prolonged period of time. And also, if you're not needing to do the ketogenic diet, if you're not somebody with epilepsy, it's not a necessary diet. And it can be dangerous, especially if you're more on the extreme side. So you do risk the getting into a state of ketoacidosis, which if you're a diabetic, you might have heard because that is associated with uncontrolled diabetes. And if not addressed, can lead to a diabetic coma, which is very dangerous. So back to the state of ketosis. So you're basically teaching your body to survive in a starvation period. So getting to that state is very difficult and it takes some time. And so during that time, you're metabolizing fat instead of carbohydrates, which is creating those ketones. A lot of people during this stage feel terrible. They'll feel like they have no energy or have like a brain fog. It's just getting to this state is very difficult for a lot of people. And for many, that's what causes them to not continue the diet. So what does the ketogenic diet look like? So like I mentioned, it is a high fat, low carbohydrate diet. So it includes a lot of butter, a lot of cheese, a lot of dairy, red meats or fatty meats, a lot of fish. And then it limits all of the carbohydrates. So the non-starchy or the starchy vegetables. So you're eating mostly non-starchy vegetables. And then it prohibits grains, starchy vegetables, most fruits and juices, legumes, so peanuts and beans, any added and natural sugars, ice cream, and for a lot of people also alcohol. So again, we're eliminating a whole food group here, which is grains. So some pros and cons to the ketogenic diet. So reports that high fat content does help people stay full, which makes sense because fat is typically high calories. And some studies have shown that it does lead to weight loss and some health benefits. However, since it is such a high fat diet, it does point to increases of cholesterol. Also the keto flu, that's what I was talking about when you feel bad in that stage of getting to ketosis. It's also known as the keto flu. So that's just a period where you just feel, it's flu-like symptoms. So you are just lethargic, you're tired, you have headaches, and that's from your body adjusting to switching over its fuel source to fat over glucose. Again, another con is it excludes entire food groups. It's very restrictive, just like the other one. It's hard to sustain long term. And again, we don't know what the long-term side effects are. There's no evidence on that or what the safety of it is. So again, in the studies, there are some short-term studies that show that it lowers triglycerides, increases your HDL cholesterol, lowers your blood pressure, and increases your LDL cholesterol. So any questions so far before we move on to intermittent fasting? I know I'm talking a lot, and it's a lot of information. Or any comments about these two diets? Does anyone have their own experience with a ketogenic? Feel free to unmute yourself. Olivia says she's read up on, is that the ketogenic diet?
We had talked here about how some of the, like, what I would consider like older diets, like when you have the South Beach and Atkins and those types of things, that's kind of the similar reducing those carbs, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but the ketogenic diet is more extreme.
Yeah,
so
it doesn't give you that, like you're putting your body in and then you're kind of reintroducing. This one's like no, none, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's what's so hard about this one and that's why it's not sustainable for a lot of people, because you have to stay in that ketosis stage, and just having like a full serving of carbs, whatever it is, you'll break that stage and then you'll have to get back to it again. So you have to stay that way. There's no like going back and forth. And for a lot of people, that's a huge con, just because it's just not realistic for them.
We have a question.
We have a question.
Yes.
In the handout that we have received, you've mentioned it in your presentation here, you're using the letters RCT. I may have missed it. What does RCT stand for?
I think it stands for random controlled trials. It's just a research term that's just relating to studies done on these diets in the research.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so the next one we'll talk about is intermittent fasting. And I feel like this is another one that's really popular right now. At least I've heard of a lot of people trying. Has anyone tried intermittent fasting? No? Okay, so this is when you have regular eating patterns of fasting. So the different fasting periods will be different depending on the person. So a lot of people will do 16 hours fasted, 8 hours of feeding. Others will do more or longer hours of fasted or less. But I think the 16-8 is probably the most common. So some people, there's different methods of fasting. We're just really talking about the regular form of intermittent fasting. Others will do alternate day fasting, where maybe they fast one day a week, or maybe they spontaneously skip a meal and fast during that time. So there's a lot of different forms of fasting.
Real quick, Kendall, there was a
Yes.
question about mothering. That word, it was in that previous slide about like something to do with the fasting. Eat very little or mothering during fasting periods.
Oh. I don't know. Let me see if that's in my notes. I've never heard that term.
I think it's supposed to be nothing.
Yeah, that could be a typo.
Yeah, that
because
makes
that
sense.
really who said that?
What might mothering be?
That was a good catch. Yeah, so whenever you're fasting, you're eating, obviously fasting, you're not eating anything. Some people will drink coffee and water or 0-calorie drinks during then. There's big debate on whether or not that's okay. But many people do that. So you're just fasting for prolonged periods of time, and then you're having a set amount of time where you are eating. And there's no restriction on what you're eating or how much you're eating. You're just eating during that window. So for the alternate day fasting, so you will choose days where you're going to eat, days when you're going to fast. And so some people will do a number of calories on their fasting days. So maybe they'll eat a little bit, or they'll eat again during that certain time frame. So if they're doing intermittent fasting, they'll be eating during your 8-hour time frame. So these can be called alternate day fasting, 5-2 diet. So where you eat normally 5 days a week and then you fast for 2 days a week, or the eat, stop, eat diet. So again, that just summarizes those. So this is an example of what that would look like during the week. So obviously you would be fasting while you're sleeping. And then some people will fast until noon, and then their 8-hour eating window is noon to 8, and then they will fast for the rest of the day. Some people will have their eating window early in the day. Some will have it dead in the middle of the day. Some will have it at the very end. But the point is that you're fasting for those 16 straight hours. So some other ways to do this, you can fast again. You can have different windows or different eating windows. So you can fast for 14, 16. Some people will do 18. And then they'll have an 8 or 10-hour window where you can eat 2 or 3 meals. Or you can spontaneously skip a meal. I hear a lot of people doing this, especially with I hear a lot of church groups doing this, and they will skip a meal, use that money that they were going to spend on that meal and give it to the offering. And then they'll use that time to fast as a time of meditating or prayer.
We had a quick comment in the chat that asked about really the benefit of fasting doesn't kick in until 16 hours, correct? Do we know?
What do you mean by the benefit of fasting? What would be kicking in after 16 hours?
The ketosis.
Okay, we're not getting into ketosis in this one because with this one, you're not restricting, again, like what you're eating at all. So we're still eating normally like our carbs, all of the food groups. So you won't get into ketosis. And like we all already fast when we're sleeping. So the idea of this is to just prolong that fasting window to make it longer. We don't really know. There's a lot of debate about this, and this is what makes it so difficult to talk about with nutrition, because there's just so much unknown out there. Like there's just not a lot of long-term research on a lot of these types of diets. So we don't really know what those benefits are. And again, depending on where these studies are done and who's done them, some of the information can be misleading.
In that same vein, somebody commented that they had seen an extreme form where you fast for either 24 hours or 36 hours. And the comment that that's really scary.
Yes, and that can be very dangerous. I've seen people do it like, I don't know how much you all get into these types of diets, but I've seen people do it for like a week where they only drink water. And that can be very dangerous. Some people have done water fasts as well, which again is very dangerous. So this is a little bit less on the extreme side, but for many, like these diets might work for some people, they might not, because everyone is so different. And that's why talking about nutrition can be difficult, especially in groups, because it's just so personalized to everybody. So you might talk to someone that's done intermittent fasting and they love it. Other people are hungry in the morning and maybe they are active in the morning and this diet just won't work for them. So it's just all very personalized. But anyways, this kind of goes over more of the different types of fasting diets or the different kinds. So some people, again, the warrior diet, they might fast for 20 hours and they'll have a 4-hour eating window. So it's a little bit more extreme than just that 16-8. And some people will do this for just like a certain amount of time. They might do it for a few weeks and then go back to their normal eating. Some people do this as just a lifestyle. So some pros and cons of this one. It is effective for weight loss if done correctly, because obviously you're cutting out a big chunk of the time that you're going to be eating. And so if you're eating fairly normally the rest of the time, you're probably going to lose weight. And then also this one's easier to follow and there's different plans to choose from. This one's a little bit less restrictive than those other two. It doesn't specify foods that you should be eating. It's not cutting out any foods. And then during fasting, you're still able to drink water and non-caloric beverages. Some cons for this one is it can be dangerous if not done correctly. So if you're fasting and during your eating window, you're just not eating enough, long-term, that can be very damaging and even dangerous. You could be more prone to vitamin or mineral deficiencies in the long run. Again, it's not recommended for everybody. So some people with chronic health issues, taking certain medications is not going to be for them. If you're diabetic, fasting is not going to be for you because you want to be eating frequent meals throughout the day because you want to keep your blood sugar level stable. So this one is not going to be one for diabetics. Same thing with people with heart disease or high or low blood pressure. You really want to be having consistent meals throughout the day and not like having, I don't want to say binge, but not having like huge meals. And then again, people with disordered eating, fasting can be really triggering for them, or it can lead to more disordered eating in the long run. And then older adults and adolescents, you don't want to have restrictive windows where you're not eating because, especially for kids, like they need to be eating regularly because they're growing, so they need more energy. Foods to consume during intermittent fasting. So since you're kind of limiting your window of eating, you want to make sure that when you're eating, that you're eating high nutrient foods and foods that are generally lower in calories, because you're probably going to be eating more during the rest of the day than you typically would be. So you want to be making sure you're getting enough vitamins and minerals, enough fiber and complex carbs, lean proteins, healthy fats. And you want to prevent muscle wasting. So if you're not eating enough calories, your muscle is going to deteriorate over time. So you want to make sure that if you are fasting, that you are getting enough calories in your eating window. Same thing with preventing dehydration. During your fasting time, you want to make sure that you're continuing to drink water and that you're getting enough liquid throughout the day. And then during your fasting periods, oh, okay, allowing yourself to drink enough beverages. So it's a balancing act, which is difficult for many people to figure out that balancing act with this diet. So like I said, this one's not like limiting your foods and never talks about what you should and shouldn't eat, but naturally people will limit those high processed foods, high sodium, high sugar foods. And you'll tend to not overeat on the days that you're non-fasting. So if you're doing that 5-2 diet where you're only fasting certain days of the week, apparently that you're less likely to overeat on those regular days. And you'll be less bloated and maybe a little bit more tired. Again, with this diet, you're more likely or more at risk to develop possible deficiencies. And some of those would be from iron, B12, and folate. So some evidence on these studies. There's been some studies showing that it does decrease weight. It does help decrease blood pressure, improves insulin sensitivity, lowers your LDL cholesterol. But again, all these trials were done for 12 weeks or less, small groups, only 23 people, which is very small sample size. So when you think in big terms of the greater population, that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. Okay. So any questions about intermittent fasting? So someone said recently saw an extreme form where you fast for, oh no, okay, we already said that. Any other comments? I feel like this one, the intermittent fasting, is probably a diet that more people have tried. So other ones are a bit more extreme. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to Whole30. So has anyone heard of the Whole30 diet? Or tried it? I've tried the Whole30 diet. What does REW stand for? Where did you see REW? Under intermittent fasting handout.
Kendall, I'll look for that while you're.
Okay, I don't have the handout in front of me. Okay, so Whole30. This one came, I don't know how long this one's been around, but it was really popular like a few years ago, maybe. There's a book that came out on the Whole30 diet and it was all the rage, which is why I did it with my husband because he wanted to. But the idea behind this one is, this is not a long-term diet. So this one's a little bit different from the other ones. This one is just for 30 days. And the idea is that you're using that 30 days to reset your body and get it back into like recover, maybe after holidays or something, you're resetting it into a healthier lifestyle. Okay, REW stands for restricted eating window. Thank you, Shonda. So people will do Whole30 to lose weight and to identify food sensitivities or allergies. So some people will do this as like an elimination diet. So if they think that they have some kind of food sensitivity, especially to like gluten or dairy, they'll try this Whole30 diet and see how it goes. So with Whole30, the idea is eating only whole foods, hence Whole30. So you're eating whole foods for 30 days. And so in this diet, you're excluding grains, dairy, and plant-based proteins. So soy and beans. So for vegetarians, it can be a little bit more difficult because you're eliminating those plant-based proteins, those like starchy proteins. And again, this is another one where you're more likely to develop nutrient deficiencies. Now, this is not long-term. So if it's not meant to do long-term, but if you are doing it long-term, you might have some deficiencies. And then after your 30 days, you're supposed to gradually reintroduce your normal foods and get back to your normal eating pattern. So like I said, the Whole30 diet excludes vegetables and some fruit. So I'm trying to remember, I think you can eat sweet potatoes, but not white potatoes. And you can eat non-starchy vegetables. And you can eat a little bit of fruit. It's all in the amounts of how much you eat. So I think you're not supposed to have more than like 1 or 2 servings per day of fruit. And then it includes nuts, seeds, and oils. It includes any meat and seafood. It includes eggs, avocados, and herbs and spices. And it eliminates grains, dairy, your plant-based proteins, which is legumes, so beans and peanuts, alcohol, any refined sugars, oils, any processed foods, and soy products like tofu, tempeh, soy milk, things like that. So some pros and cons of the Whole30 diet. So some obvious pros, you're going to be eating more vegetables. You're going to be focusing on real foods. You're not going to be eating processed foods. And then you're eliminating all added sugar, alcohol, processed foods. And I think you can still have caffeine on Whole30. Some people, I think, eliminate that. Some cons, again, you're eliminating entire food groups, so grains and dairy. It's kind of like a no pain, no gain rhetoric, which can be kind of triggering for some people, kind of lead to some not so healthy eating patterns. It's a short-term approach. It only lasts for 30 days. It's a little bit extreme for a lot of people, depending on what your normal eating habits are. And it has big promises. So it promises that you're resetting your body. You're going to, so one of the big things about this is getting rid of cravings. So a lot of people that struggle with sugar cravings try out Whole30 because they think they're going to eliminate all their cravings. And this diet has not been around, I don't think, for a very long time. So there's really no research, no evidence on this. But a lot of people, like I mentioned, have a hard time following it because it is very restrictive. And it's just not sustainable for many people to do for even 30 days. So any questions before we move on about those 4 diets, or maybe one that we didn't talk about? So the Paleo, Intermittent Fasting, Ketogenic, and Whole30. Any questions or comments on those? Okay, we're going to move on to some red flags. So if you are looking at a diet to try, or maybe you see like something online or on Facebook or a commercial or something, these are going to be some of the red flags to pay attention to. So first one is diets that eliminate entire food groups. So several of the ones we talked about today did that. So if they're eliminating carbohydrates or grains, totally eliminating dairy, that's going to be a big red flag. And that's because you're going to be eliminating nutrients with those. So not that you can't find them from other places, but so for specifically calcium and iron, those are so meat sources are very rich in iron, dairy sources very rich in calcium normally. So you're putting yourself more at risk to develop deficiencies in those later on. Another red flag would be a overemphasis on a single food or nutrient. So like somebody mentioned the grapefruit diet on here. I've also heard of the egg diet, where you're really emphasizing one food or one nutrient. Protein is a big one that's overemphasized a lot. That's going to be a red flag because there is no magic food. Healthy eating is all about variety. Another one would be a promise for a quick fix. And I think we all kind of know that as a red flag. So if any diet is promising like, rapid weight loss very quickly, if it's promising that it's going to turn around your immune function, your body's going to be reset, it's going to eliminate cravings, that's a big red flag, because it's one of those things, if it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. And in that case, it's not true. And the last one is going to be diets where they say that you can do little to no activity and still lose a lot of weight. So bottom line, losing weight, it all has to do with how much you exercise and how much you eat. And there's no other way around it. So diets that promise where you don't have to do any physical activity and still lose a lot of weight are not going to be effective. They're probably not going to be very sustainable. And they put you at risk for losing that important lean muscle mass. So you're going to be deteriorating your muscle because you're not utilizing it, which is not good. So examining some research, I won't get too much into this, but like I mentioned before, it's really important to do your research on this. And it can also be very difficult because there is just so much information out there that you want to make sure that you're getting your information from reliable sources. So looking at the research is going to be probably the best way to start. You guys probably aren't going to be reading journal articles on all these diets, but if you are, or if you're reading articles, make sure that they're from good places. And you always know that we use research-based information with Extension, so all of our resources are trustworthy. If you are looking at articles, some things to take into consideration is, what is the group that did this article? What's the sample size? What's the time frame? What was the population that was studied? Who wrote the article? What are their qualifications? Where was this published? Is it peer reviewed? How old is this study? So these are all things to consider. So now we're just going to go through, we have a little, maybe 10 minutes or so left. We're going to talk about some healthy diets. So I think there's just a couple on here. So obviously, I'm sure you all are familiar with my plate. But we're going to talk about the Mediterranean diet because that one is ranked overall healthiest diet just based on any type of research long-term. So the Mediterranean diet, is anyone familiar with this one or anyone tried it? A lot of heart patients might try the Mediterranean diet. So the idea behind this one is, which you can see the pyramid on here, the bottom, which this one makes a little bit different because they include physical activity and social connection, which no other diet really mentions. Social connection is very interesting. So that is kind of the basis of that. And then they focus on eating a lot of whole grains, fruits and vegetables, legumes, and healthy fats from nuts and oils. They also eat a lot of fish and seafood, fermented dairy like yogurt or kefir, a lot of eggs and poultry, and then occasional red meat and sweets. So the whole base of their diet is rooted around whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. And then, of course, seafood and limiting red meat. And they don't eat a whole lot of poultry either, which is interesting. So some of the research on the Mediterranean diet, they found to have multiple health benefits. So lowers incidence of cardiovascular disease. So I mentioned a lot of heart patients will try the Mediterranean diet. Lowers incidence of type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancers, and certain neurodegenerative diseases. It tends to lengthen lifespan. So has anybody heard of the blue zones? I can't remember how many blue zones there are. Anybody familiar? I see some people shaking their heads. So the blue zones, it's like the places in the world where it has the healthiest population or like the longest living and also happiest sometimes populations. And a lot of them follow similar, or it's very similar to the Mediterranean diet for a lot of these places. Because I think some of them are in Greece. I think there's some in California, some more in South America. I can't remember where they all are, but a lot of them are in Europe and Greece, where they follow similar to the Mediterranean diet. And then the other one we'll go over is the DASH eating plan. Anyone familiar with the DASH diet? This one's an older one. 5 blue zones around the world. I heard that there was more now. I think there might be like even 8. It changes apparently. There's a book written on it that was really trendy not too long ago. A lot of people were super interested in it. But if you're interested in that, definitely check it out, or just read up on the blue zones. So the DASH diet stands for dietary approaches to stop hypertension. A lot of, again, heart patients will be on this diet, or people that struggle with high blood pressure. I think this diet can be found on the American Heart Association website. So the idea behind this one is it promotes fruits and vegetables, low-fat dairy, whole grains, fish, legumes, and nuts, and it limits red meat, even lean red meat, sweets, and added sugars. So this diet's going to be high in a lot of different vitamins and minerals, such as potassium, calcium, magnesium, as well as protein and fiber, and it's going to be low in total fat, specifically saturated fat, which is the bad fat, and cholesterol and sodium. Because again, the whole point of this diet is to reduce your blood pressure. So within 2 weeks, a lot of people notice a difference in their blood pressure from following the DASH diet. There's more research on this one, and it's a lot more accurate. It's been around for a long time. But again, this one is it's not as restrictive as a lot of those other diets we talked about. So it more focuses on the quality of your food and less on calories, which is good for many people. And it doesn't eliminate anything. So it doesn't say that you're not allowed to have processed foods or added sugar or refined grains. It just teaches you to limit them and have them in smaller quantities. So again, just some normal healthy eating patterns to incorporate rather than following any of these fad diets. These trends would be similar to the DASH diet. So just focus on eating a variety of fruits and vegetables, getting a lot of colors, getting whole grains so you get that fiber and those added vitamins and minerals that you get from whole grains, focusing on lean proteins, seafood, poultry, maybe even trying out some plant-based proteins, because again, those typically come with a lot of fiber as well as other vitamins and minerals. Limiting added sugars, so trying getting less than 10% of your daily calories from added sugars, which most people probably are not counting their calories, so 10%, that doesn't really mean much to them. But if you're just limiting your added sugar, then that's a step in the right direction. Also limiting saturated and trans fats. So saturated fats, like I mentioned, are the bad fats that you don't want to have a lot of. And that's typically going to be from animal products like red meat and high fat dairy. So limiting those, eating less of them would be good, as well as limiting sodium. So trying going for less than 2,300 milligrams per day for adults, which I think is, I can't remember. I think it's about 2 teaspoons maybe of added salt, not very much. So there is no one size fits all with diet. So if you're so we don't really support diet trends. Or a lot of research does not support these diet trends just because, like I mentioned, there is no diet that will fit everybody because everyone is different. So just focusing on incorporating those healthy eating habits is really going to be the best route, and then making sure that you're getting your physical activity daily. So any questions? So I've got some comments here. A really good source of determining calorie intake, as well as fats, carbs, proteins, cholesterol, and sodium, is MyFitnessPal. It is free app. Yeah, so if you just want to try out tracking your calories for a few days, you can use MyFitnessPal. It's a free app you can download. It is really interesting. It will recommend how many calories you eat based on your age, your activity level, different things. And you can set your goals in there if you want to lose weight. It will tell you how many grams of protein. It's just really interesting. However, it's not really recommended for long-term use. I wouldn't recommend using it every single day, but it is good just as a gauge to kind of see where you can improve.
I have a quick comment about MyFitnessPal and those types of things in terms of the calorie counters. Sometimes you have to be careful with that. If you plug in, I have a weight loss goal of X, and then
Yeah.
it tells you based on, okay, I want to lose it by Y. It'll tell you, hey, so you need to intake 1,200 calories in order to do that. You have to be careful because everybody's situation is different, exactly what Kendall was talking about in terms of like, there's no one size fits all. So you have to be careful if it tells you that.
Yeah, and it's not accurate because it's just a computer. And so it's going to be off. And same thing when you're tracking, like most people are not going to be weighing everything that they put in their mouth. It's just not, it's just not realistic. And not everyone is making all of their food like 24/7. So your tracking is going to be off too. So it's really just used as a tool, not as like, the holy grail you need to follow this 100% to a T. And that's why I don't recommend using it all the time. And it can be very unhealthy for a lot of people because they rely on this tool and they are going to follow it exactly. And that just leads to unhealthy eating patterns in the long term and can be really triggering for a lot of people that maybe struggle with eating disorders. So again, if that is you, don't track your calories because it's not necessary to track your calories. But again, it's just a tool. So if you're curious about it, you can learn some things. But again, I wouldn't use it as, the Bible for eating. So I'm going to put in the link to the evaluation. It's online. So if everyone would take a second and click on it, it will only take you a few minutes to complete.
There was a comment regarding MyFitnessPal in there then, and I think that's actually a really good use of it, talking about like diabetes. So you're able to really see like the content of what you're eating at that point, especially with regard to a health concern.
Yeah, if you're tracking, especially if you're diabetic and you're tracking your carbohydrate and you need to know how many grams you're eating, it can be a good tool for that. However, you can track your carbohydrates on your own, just on a piece of paper. But if you want to see like that bigger picture where it incorporates protein, fat, calories, it can be a really good tool if you use it correctly. So I put in the link to the evaluation. If you all would click it and complete it. I realized this was very long. It was a lot of information. Again, nutrition is just a difficult topic to just skim the surface, just because there's so much you can get into. But if you all have any questions or comments, you want some more information on any of these topics, feel free to reach out to me or your agent, and we will try and get you some more information, some good, reliable information. But yeah, so any comments or questions?
Kendall, good job.
Thank you.
I've got some with a watch party here and they're filling out the paper copies. Do you want me to just copy those and email them to you?
Yeah, if you, especially if you all, when you take this back to your clubs, you utilize the paper copies for the evaluations. If you'll scan them in or like give them to your agent to scan them in, if you all could send them to me, because I need to share all of this with the with Illinois Extension since it's their program. I would appreciate that.
Where did you enter the link for the evaluation?
In the chat box. So
Okay.
if you
Well,
go to the
apparently mine's not
bottom,
working, so, okay.
if you go to the bottom and click on chat, it should pop up for you.
Okay,
You might have it set to where it's not, doesn't do it automatically.
I'm not